at the very beginning. Once again, welcome to the third professional development activity in the series that we are running here at HBA Learning Centres. Now, before we commence, I would like to pay our respects to the traditional custodians. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Now, we have something short of 500 people that are registered to be here today. Therefore, there's about 100 that haven't been here before. So I'm afraid I'll have to cover off some things that many of you have heard before. By attending today, you will receive a statement of attendance on your email over the first few days of next week. You should save that statement of attendance into your professional development file and enter in your professional development plan any activities which you intend to get involved with over the next year. You should know that HBA Learning Centres is running this not because we're trying to sell you something. Frankly, we just felt that something could be added to the professional development activities which are offered to RTOs and to trainers and assessors in particular. So this is a service to the training and assessment industry, and there is no cost involved, and anybody can join in. And as we talk at the moment, I can assure you we have people here from every state, every territory, and so many different countries around the world. So wherever you are, hello, and for some of you it might be nighttime or early morning time. Now, given that you're trainers and assessors, we know that you're not shy. We know that you're gregarious and you're ebullient, and so you're able to ask questions. And to help you with that, I have some people here helping me. Online, I have Tim Fitzgerald, who is now our compliance manager. I have Neil Fowler here, who's our senior TAE trainer, and Carol Bowe, who's making all of the technology work, at least she is now. Excuse me. You have my word that this will not go past 5 o'clock. And over the next month or so, we'll announce 3 more sessions. And those sessions, I'm going to make at least one of them on something which is a little lighter, not quite so serious, perhaps a little more engaging. Now, I once again, as per last time, I'm absolutely flattered and flabbergasted by all of the lovely emails I've received from so many people. I want to thank you very, very much for taking the time to thank us for running this. What we know is that we're going to cover training and assessment strategies, learning programs, session plans, and work-based learning pathways. These are the subjects for this particular PD session. The standards for RTOs 2015 has the first line which says, the RTO's training and assessment strategies and practices are responsive to industry and learner needs and meets the requirements of the training packages and vet accredited courses. So if you think about that, this thing called a training and assessment strategy and its practices are so important, it's been given the first line in the standards for RTOs. So it's an interesting question, is it? What does it mean? I mean, what is a training and assessment strategy? Well, before we define that, let me tell you, in years gone past, it was called a learning assessment strategy. And perhaps 6 or so years ago, for reasons I have no idea about, it was trained to a training and assessment strategy. So if you hear LAS or TAS from anywhere within VET, it is in fact the same thing. When you look at a training and assessment strategy, you know, there's only 2 things that an RTO has to follow. So you imagine it's pretty simple, wouldn't you? I mean, all we have to do is follow the standards for RTOs, and we need to follow the training package rules. The difficulty here is we're talking probably of tens of thousands of different elements that we need to meet. So how simple would a training and assessment strategy be to put together? Well, if our training and assessment strategies are so important, do we give access to everybody? No, we don't. Let me define for you in my simple words what a training assessment strategy is. It's the approach an RTO takes to the assessment and facilitation of a stream of learning in VET. Now, we know there are far more complex definitions of what a training and assessment strategy is, but if you boil it down, that's what it is. It's the who, what, where, when, why, and how of a particular stream of learning. And arguably, this is the #1 most important document in an RTO. For example, consider your #1 product, whatever that is. If your would-be competitor had a copy of your training assessment strategy, they could simply change your name to theirs, have the resources available, and submit it to your regulator for inclusion to their scope of registration. So it's a highly confidential document. And interestingly enough, a training assessment strategy has no standard format. There is no standard template for it. But what they all have is certain elements that must be addressed. So what we wanted to do today, in part, was to consider an old training assessment strategy that we had. When HBA first started as an RTO, it needed to have something to deliver. So we had TAA 40104, but we also put on, in Queensland, what was called the Blue Card, which was the Construction Site Access Card for Queensland. Now that's subsequently been superseded by the White Card, which is nationally recognised, and we have nothing to do with it. We only kept the Blue Card for a couple of years. So if we look at training and assessment strategy that we put together, and I have doctored this slightly to change some things where I thought it was a little confidential. Let's look at what should appear on a training and assessment strategy, and they don't have to be in this order, but this is the order that our document was in. Firstly, we want to look at the details of the RTO. So here you can see very simply the details of that. We wanted to look at the contact. Who is the contact in the RTO? Now these are very simple. We next get on to what is the background of the RTO. Now here what you're looking to do is to provide explanation as to the why you should be allowed to have something on your scope. What's your background that gets you to the point that you're able to apply for something to be put on your scope of registration? We look at the next element, which is a delivery and assessment strategy, an outline of what we're going to do. We have a delivery period. What is it you're going to deliver? And what are the elements of the particular, in this case, unit of competency that you're going to work with? Now, obviously, these things are available from training.gov.au. We then move to the next element that we're going to deal with is client. So who would you be aiming your qualification at? You see, bear in mind, our government, and governments, depending upon what state you're in, our government does not want RTOs putting qualifications on their scope, which has no hope of succeeding. You may know that as recently as last year, the Australian Skills Quality Authority, the national vet regulator, found something short of 100 RTOs that were registered and had nothing on their scope. They therefore deregistered those RTOs. So here we say this is the cohort, this is our target that we're looking for. Next, we look at what are the delivery arrangements? Well, here we cite the delivery arrangements that we would use for this particular unit of competency. The next element that we're going to deal with is how will you deliver and how will you gather evidence? Now this second part on how you would gather evidence is particularly important. You need to make sure that that is consistent with what is on the unit of competency when it tells you how assessment may occur. You need to look at that to make sure that those things can be done. But when you look at that, you go, okay, that's how the RTO is going to deliver, that's how the RTO is going to gather its evidence. Next, we take a look at the delivery schedule. Now, this delivery schedule is probably a little more complex than what you need as an overview of the delivery. I know for some of you that text will be quite small, and I apologise for that, but our slides will be available for you should you wish to have them. So when we look here, we see the order in which we're going to deliver and what it is we're going to deliver in order. Next element that we look at here is the delivery and assessment staff. Now, you would know, as indeed I know, that the regulators have a very, very specific set of words and requirements for trainers and assessors. You find it in standard number 1. And so we have to here identify who the delivery and the assessment staff that we will utilise and what is their background, what is their qualifications. Remembering the regulators want to see trainers and assessors who not only hold qualifications, but they're experienced in the industry segment in which they're going to work. We look at the next element that we're going to have here, which is our assessment validation process. I mean, how will you validate the assessment process you're going to use? Now, we know that training and assessment, the 40116, was significantly strengthened in the assessment area. We know that you can provide facilitation that might be not as good as it could be. We know that you could provide customer service that's not as good as it could be, and you'll get a bit of a rap over the knuckles for those things. But if you start to assess incorrectly, not having processes which are consistent with the requirements of both vocational education and training, and indeed of the units of competency and the standards for RTOs, then you will find yourself possibly losing your RTO license. This is very important. The next element that we're going to look at here is what are the infrastructure requirements? If you're going to run this unit, how are you going to do it? Well, here we're going to say these are the things that we need to have, and that once again is fairly simple for anybody to put together. The next element that we look at here is what are the delivery pathways? Now, you would already know, I'm sure, that the regulators, and indeed VET in itself, is not interested in any qualification that doesn't go anywhere. Everything that exists in VET should have a pathway. It should lead to somewhere. And so what we need to do is identify, if you do this, where can you go along your pathway of learning? And indeed, that's what we show there. The next element that we look at here will be, what is your RTO process? Now, nearly everything within vocational education training, nearly everything, is subject to RPL. There are some things where you cannot apply for RPL. I believe security is one of those things. But every RTO is required to have a recognition of prior learning process. Now, what's interesting is these things vary from RTO to RTO, often dependent upon the qualifications which they are facilitating. But they all start and end with the same thing. They all start with a request for recognition of prior learning, and that should be done in a formal fashion. And they all end with an assessment decision. Next element that we look at is consultation. Now, I can't tell you how important industry consultation is on this. We at HBA do consultation with 3 or 4 industry players on each of the things that we have on our scope. Why do we consult? Well, you see, we have designed how we think the course should run. We have designed what we think we need to be doing. And we have designed exactly how we might facilitate. But see, we need to validate that. We need to validate that through industry consultation. So all of the things that we've done, I need to ensure can actually meet the needs of the industry segment. So you can sit on the board, we've got to ensure there's a legitimate need for the training, make sure we understand your needs properly, identify the resources needed, and we're going to run through with our consulting body exactly whether these resources are fine. Is the language fine for the cohort? We want to find out what training would already be in place in that industry segment, so we don't say it all again. And you can see the other 3 elements on the bottom of that slide. Now, as we go through consultation, the next element that we're going to cover off is we're going to list who we're going to talk to. Now, obviously, Bob's building doesn't actually exist, at least I don't think it does, and Bob Fixham certainly doesn't exist. But indeed, this is who we're going to consult with, and the next slide will tell us that we're going to start off with looking at the training delivery model, or mode, but it means model. We're going to speak, we're going to demonstrate, and we're going to do questions and answers. After that, the next element is going to look at the enterprise capacity to deliver and assess. Now, in this instance, back in those days, HBA had two companies. We had an industrial labour hire business, which I sold. And so we were putting together this training assessment strategy on the basis that that organisation was in fact going to work as a third-party provider from HBA. So here you can see the enterprise capacity to deliver and assess. Moving on from there, we look at our own capacity to deliver and assess. So I'm going to be telling the enterprise that I am consulting with how we're going to do it, how we're going to deliver, and how we're going to assess. And each time I talk through this consultation process, I'm documenting what's transpired. I need to have a record of this. Next element that we cover off is customization of the training package. You know, we call that contextualization, but if you're going to deliver this, say, to a construction site tomorrow, and the next day you might be going to a provider of product to the construction sites, you might slightly have to customize or contextualize that. Moving to the next element, we've got the sequencing of delivery and assessment. We want to make sure that that meets the needs of the cohort. Moving to the next element, I'm going to go through with my consultation what the recognition of prior learning premises. It's going to be available, but it's got to be supplied under evidence that is suitable to our national regulator. Our next element we cover off is the use of simulation in evidence gathering. In the blue card, we could use simulation. And so we're going to go through with our consulting organisations how we're going to do that. Moving forward, our next element is how will we collect the evidence? So we're going to sit down with them and we're going to go through, and they may say, no, that won't work. You know, we have a high instance of people here who cannot do that. So we would then look at, if that's a consistent theme through 4 consultations, we look at how we modify that. Next element that we look at there is catering for candidates with special needs. You see, that unit doesn't say you cannot do the unit if you're in a wheelchair. It doesn't say you cannot do the unit if you have some other, let's say, learner characteristic, which is different than the rest of us. So to that extent, we must cater for candidates with special needs. They're able to do that unit, and here we look at how we're going to do it. Moving forward, we look at the competencies to be developed through the program. Here we are covering off what we're going to work with. Going forward to the next unit, we're going to integrate the enterprise operating procedures with the competency standards. So in this case, remember, HBA Industrial was going to be doing this. Moving forward, we're going to integrate the enterprise performance standards with the competency standards to ensure that that is consistent. And next one, we're going to look at the competencies delivered and assessed on the job. Now, in this case, this was being done in a virtual environment. We were doing it within a classroom, which was allowable as far as the unit was concerned. Next element we're going to look at is the scheduling of delivery and assessment activities. We've shown you what that looks like. And so the next element that we go through is the assessment tools and the processes. So once again, through consultation, I need to make sure that the assessment tools and the processes are consistent with the industry segment. Moving forward, we look at the record keeping. How will we keep the records? Who has availability to the records? How will we achieve payment? These things, once again, are consulted. Our next element that we go through is the appeals and reassessment. What if the learner doesn't like our assessment decision? And isn't it funny? They only ever appeal decisions that are in the negative. Nobody ever appeals a decision in the positive. But what are we going to do if that happens? How will that work in industry? The next element we look at is the communication between the RTO and the enterprise. How are we going to communicate on an ongoing basis? Going forward, we now look at the background. This is the background of the enterprise where we have a third party involved, which won't exist in all cases going forward. We have business skills, learning, and structured training. Now, this is a complex table. It was way too complex to put on the screen because, quite frankly, it would not be able to be read by you. But we do have something to tell you about this in a very little minute. So going forward from here, we know that the vet regulator will see our submission for addition to scope as being supported initially by the training assessment strategy. So we look at this training assessment strategy. It is the hub of our submission to the vet regulator. It has to be picture book perfect. And bear in mind, they have people who know this stuff inside out and upside down. They're going to look at that and they're going to ensure that it does have the needs that we seek out of that. So if we look at the other purposes that the TAS can serve, it is the hub of an audit. If you are fortunate enough to be picked on or by your regulator, one of the first things they will ask for is, where's your training and assessment strategy? They're going to look at that. And they're going to say, all right, we need to prove whether this RTO is or is not operating consistently with the strategy which they have on foot. Next, it actually is a reflection of the past 12 months. You see, you're required, as indeed we are, to review your training assessment strategy every 12 months. And so making sure, of course, that we change the date and the version on the bottom of the thing. But this allows us to review what we've done over a 12-month period. What you actually find is that your delivery method and or your assessment method or the introduction of new processes actually slightly change your training assessment strategy. Now, we've recently seen the need to do it on our TASs because of the introduction of virtual classrooms, where previously we didn't have virtual classrooms on them. Remember, your TAS must reflect exactly what you are doing. Now, what we know is that the training assessment strategy is 100% strategic as a document. It's highly confidential. It's not available to everybody. It's a confidential document reviewed every 12 months, and it's all about what am I going to do in the future. Now, if we cascade down the hierarchy of documents, we know that a training assessment strategy is supported by a learning program. And those of you who have done the training assessment course, which most of you have, will have produced learning programs as part of what you were doing within the design learning field. Now, if you look at this learning program here, you can see at the very beginning of it, it's laying out various elements relative to what we want to do. And if we look then at the next part of the learning program, we can see that it has several sessions here. Here we show 9 different sessions. Now let's look at what that's telling us. It's telling us the elements that we cover off out of the units. It's telling us exactly what the learning activities are going to be. It tells us what resources we need, what the assessment methods are, and what's the delivery method. Now, let's look. This actually has several different uses. Firstly, it's an auditable document, which is sent to the regulators, and we know that they're going to view this and say, has learning been laid out in a consistent fashion, or is that RTA trying to do 40% of the learning in the first 20% of the time? Because that would not be fair to the learners. So it's used there as an audit tool for the regulator. It's also, used as a management tool. Let's supposing I work for you and I'm up to session number 7. And unbeknownst to me, you walk into the room and you sit down. If I'm not talking about what's shown as being session number 7, but in fact, I'm now talking about what's in session number 5, at the first break, you're going to get me aside. You're going to say, why are you not on session 7? Why are you behind? And you're going to say, I need you to explain and document why you're behind. I need you to put together a different learning program showing that we do complete at session 9. I need you to document this, and this needs to be saved in the course file. So there it becomes a management tool. Also, it can be that I am a learner of yours. I know that I'm going to be away on holidays when you're running session 6 and session 7. I can come to you and say, hey, look, I'm going to be away on these sessions. Could you please tell me what are you going to cover so I can study myself and call for the notes whilst I'm absent on the beach drinking pina coladas? What about this? Trainers are like everybody else. Do we not all get sick? Well, if you have a trainer that gets sick and they were due to take session number 6, and you have a standby trainer who knows their stuff, then they know exactly what it is they're supposed to be covering. Now, this document, this resource, a learning program, is 50% strategic and it's 50% tactical. It's talking about the things we will do and the things that we will do. Now, as we cascade down our hierarchy of resources, we arrive at a session plan. Now, in years gone by, I'm embarrassed to say, but it's true, way before the days of an RTO, when I had another training business, this would be how we did a session plan. When you look at it today, as a company that's delivering TAE, it's sort of shameful, but it has no data on it. It has nothing. You couldn't give that to somebody and say, hey, run that course. Now, what I want to do is submit to you an old session plan we had for TAA AWS 402A, which was assessed for competence, which was a unit in the TAA 40104. Let's look at the session plan that we had there. Firstly, we have an introduction page where we're looking at what it is, what are the elements, how we're going to demonstrate ability, what's the performance criteria. Next, we go forward and we look at the session plan. Now, I would like to say to you, there's going to be 3 pages to the session plan. The capacity for us to put it onto one page, it would have been so small nobody could have seen it. So if we just take that first section, 9:30 a.m., it goes to 11 a.m., we're looking at what it is we're going to cover, exactly what the activities are, and what the delivery method is. So I'll show you page 2, and you'll see that it follows a similar format. So now we go to page 3, and we see a similar format. So if we look at one of the uses or some of the uses of this, firstly, you've got a sick trainer. And so you've asked a person to come in and take over from your new trainer. You hand them the session plan for the particular session on the assumption that they are qualified and competent to run this and they have a history of being able to do it. They can simply look at that session plan and in a matter of 10 minutes, they can run that session or that day. You know, that's a lot better than coming in front of a class, say, hey, g'day, your trainer's sick, I'm filling in for her or him. What are you up to? What are you doing? Well, that is not how we run vocational education and training. Now, if we group these 3 resources together, training assessment strategy, learning program, session plans, and you follow those, they provide a fail-safe approach to risk management and quality training. Now, we have available for you freely, no charge, a sample of those 3 documents. You're free to send an email to Carol and ask for a copy of them. She will simply send them to you. You're free to use them, rebrand them, modify them, or discard them. But they're available for you to have a look at. And remember, TASs take no set format. This is just a format that we have used. Okay, what I want to do now is I want to think about a word. This word is pathway. Just think in your mind, what is a pathway? Now, if your mind is saying, hey, it's like a journey from A to B, then you're pretty right. Now let's look at the next word. We'll add the word learning to the front of pathway. What is a learning pathway? Well, you know, I've shared with many thousands of people that I think life is a learning pathway. You know, when we're born and we're perhaps 3 days of age, are we learning? Well, the answer is yes. What's our source of learning? Well, I would like to say the father, but that's probably not altogether true. We know that nature plays quite a big role in that, and we know that mum is there helping. And we take this person through to 12 years of age, and are they learning? The answer is yes. What's their source of learning? The internet, the kids at school, kids out in the playground. We take the person forward to 20 years of age. Are they still learning? Yes. Although you would know, as I know, at 20 they know everything there is about everything in the world, and indeed you will know nothing. But that's how kids are, and I'm sure that's how we were. And we take them forward to the day before they draw their last breath. And are they learning? Yes. What's their source of learning? The doctors and the nurses around them. They know the name of all of the drugs they're on and the side effects. So our whole life is a learning pathway. But what I want to have a do, what I want is to look at a very special learning pathway. And we call this a work-based learning pathway. Now, I would like to give you one of my hypothetical stories. It's not real, but it highlights for you what a work-based learning pathway is. We have a young lady, her name is 4 years of age. Her name is Sally. And at 4 years of age, Sally likes nothing more at night than sitting in the seat, and her mum is behind her as she brushes her long, blonde hair. Sally loves that. And we take Sally forward, and now she's 5 years of age, and Sally has met her mum's friend, whose name is Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Jones owns the local hairdressing salon, which employs 5 hairdressers. And her mum has got a deal with Mrs. Jones. She takes Sally down there from time to time. Mrs. Jones just cuts the ends off and styles it and puts a bit of spray in, and Sally loves it. She absolutely loves it because she says she can do things that her mum can't do. And we take Sally forward, and Sally is 12 years of age, still having long blonde hair. And Sally is struggling a little bit at school, but she's still going to school. And we take Sally forward, and Sally is now 16 years of age. And she says, Mum, Dad, we need to have a chat. She said, you know, this place you send me to, this place called school, the teachers hate us kids. We hate the teachers. You see, Mum, Dad, I don't understand. I mean, why do I need to know that 2x equals AB? Why do I need to know how far the sun is from the earth? Why do I need to know the chemical formula for oil? She said, I am not going to go back to school. Now, I don't know whether you guys know, I'm sure you do, but whilst the law in our country says that every child must remain at school until they're 18 years of age, you try and make a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old go to school when they say they're not going. You can physically grab them and put them in your car, and now you've just committed assault. So in this story of mine, we have Sally's mum and dad who are enlightened and say, okay, love, you don't want to go back to school. What do you want to do? Because you have to do something. And Sally says, Mum, I want to be a hairdresser. All my life, I wanted to be a hairdresser. She said, well, where do you want to work? She said, well, I want to go down and talk to Mrs. Jones and see whether she'll employ me. So Sally's mum says, okay, I'll take you down there tomorrow. You can talk to Mrs. Jones. So Sally's mum takes her down. She talks to Mrs. Jones, and Mrs. Jones says, okay, Sally, I'll tell you what, you're a good kid. I've known you all your life. You've been polite, well presented, and you speak well. I'm going to let you work here for the next 2 months. We won't pay you. This is called work experience. And if at the end of 2 months, I find that what you're doing is satisfactory, I'm going to pay to send you to a local RTO next year. And we will put you into a Certificate 3 of hairdressing, which will take you 3 years to complete. And at the end of that, you will be a qualified hairdresser. But Sally, you should know, you'll be going into the RTO on Thursdays. So you'll now have to work on the Saturday rather, to make up for the Thursday. Well, for Sally, this is utopia. This is perfect. This is exactly what she wants. So we take Sally forward. Sally's been sent through to the local RTO. and she's commenced her formal training. Then we ask ourselves, at this point, what is Sally doing at work? Well, Sally is sweeping hair, Sally is getting the lunches, Sally is getting people's dry cleaning. And those are the sorts of functions that somebody at that level is doing. We know that the local RTO, after a month or two, will send somebody out to talk to Mrs. Jones and say, well, this is going to be how we're going to train Sally. What will you have her doing at work? And Mrs. Jones and the RTO will work in unison to develop the next year or two or three of formal and informal learning, walking down the pathway hand in hand. And so when we get to the end of year 3, and Sally is now a qualified impresser, we ask ourselves, if one of the billionaires of our country's wife walks in to the hairdresser, do they say, Sally, you're now qualified to have a go? No, they do not. The reason they do not is because there's still much to learn at a higher level of learning. So what we've seen there is a very simple work-based learning pathway. But all work-based learning pathways are not simple. Think traineeships, think apprenticeships. Let's highlight one of our largest and indeed longest corporate accounts. We shan't give it a name. It's a large manufacturing company that produces products which are sold into building and construction industry segment. Let's say the board meets and the board says, we want to put on 6 management trainees. We want 2 of them to end up in manufacturing, 2 of them to end up in finance, and 2 in logistics, and we want them there over the next 5 years. Well, the TAE qualified person is the one that now has to design, develop, and implement the work-based learning pathway. How do we do it? Who do we involve? What we know straight away is we're going to need some sort of learning partner. So if we look very simply at the steps that we would use, we're going to identify firstly the timelines we're going to have. The timelines are 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is that's been deemed by the board. We want to know what the final knowledge or skill set each of these individuals should hold so that we can plan progression to that. We need to plot what is the pathway to the end goal. Now, there will be certain things that we would need to engage them in along the way. We need to select the learning partners. They could be RTOs, they could be universities. We're going to involve the managers and the supervisors. You see, without the buy-in of managers and supervisors, whatever you're going to do will fail. We're going to get that buy-in, get them to accept, because they've got to look after these people, they've got to keep them safe. And then we will have a subsequent meeting with those people to establish the KPIs. You see, you need strong KPIs for such a program. You can't go down 5 years and find the whole thing failed. If it wasn't going right, the question you ask yourself is, at what point would you cancel part of the pathway for an individual or more than one? And so that's very dependent upon interaction between you, the enterprise, and the learning partners, and of course, the individual involved. Some of the things we need to think about along the way are, what are some of the hurdles and the barriers that you're going to come across? Some of those things will be things like people worrying that those people are going to be put into more senior jobs than they, people not liking certain individuals, somebody getting sick too often, churn around the individual occurring more frequently. Now, all work-based learning pathways are not as complex as this. You see, work-based learning pathways are not for the untrained or the unskilled. But let's assume you have introduced a new LMS into your company. How are you going to get everybody competent in the use of that? What's your program? What is the pathway you will establish? Perhaps you've employed a new receptionist. Who is going to train and get that person okay with everything that we are going to do? Now, I hope that's been of value to you. It's now Kahoot quiz time. We have to the winners, in fact, everybody's a winner. The mere fact that you had the opportunity and were willing to have a go at that means we're all winners. You are winners. Now, I want to thank you so much for attending today and for those that have attended the 3 sessions. Over the next 5 or 6 weeks, you will see us send out an email to you, which will nominate the next 3 sessions we will run. I've had a constant question in my email, which is, how many PD sessions should my trainers do each year? And let me say to you, too much is never enough. You cannot do too much PD. Just fill it up. So next time you're audited and they ask for your professional development files, they just look at them, put them down and move on to the next thing. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful once again interacting with you. Thank you.